Hello, everybody. Let's talk about accelerated learning techniques, what they are, and how we can use them in our studies for learning anything. If you're just joining us, let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. Hit the thumbs up. And let's start with a definition of accelerated learning because, well, what does Google say? When I pumped in the term into Google, it says that it's an intensive method of study which enables material to be learnt in a relatively short time, and a program of learning which allows academically able children to progress through school more rapidly than others. So those are two possible definitions. We're going to focus really on the method of study definition, which enables material to be learned in a relatively short period of time. But is that really what we're talking about when we talk about accelerated learning? Is it a method of study, or is it a number of methods coming together in a streamlined package? If you have any thoughts about that, let me know. I don't think it is anything singular at all. It's definitely a combination of methods, and we'll talk about a bunch of them today on the live stream. Really looking forward to an interesting discussion today. Let me know if you're actually able to hear in the chat. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, how you're feeling. And wow, what an amazing beginning to the week. It's Monday, of course, for me here in Australia. And let's rock and roll. Daniel is in the house. Thanks for saying hello, Daniel. Aloha. Not sure if our display is working. There it is. Chanel is here over with Facebook. I see Facebook is working. They had some sort of announcement that it wasn't going to be working, but I guess it is. So that's pretty cool. Good to see you, Chanel. Good to see you, Daniel. Thanks for being here. Thanks for saying hello. And Sung Knight is here. Wow, what a cool name. Sung Knight von Goosevelt. What's up? Good to see you. If you're just joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And if you're new to this channel, get subscribed, hit that bell icon. And if you're joining us on the replay, say hello in the discussion below. All right. So, hello, Rohit. Good to see you in Santa Clara. All right. That sounds like a cool place. Let's start with some of the bad, because when I was looking into this, some people seem to think that that there's some bad techniques for learning, and they put in highlighting, rereading, and keyword notes as being bad. And when I looked at this, I just thought, what's so bad about these things? Now, highlighting certainly can be bad, and there's a really bad way to do it. But highlighting as such, should we just throw highlighting out because some people think it's bad? I'm not so convinced that it's bad. What do you think? I've certainly used it, and there's a particular way that I've used it. Rereading, well, as we'll see, is an incredibly important strategy if you want to use accelerated learning techniques. If you don't reread, you ain't read nothing. And I'll use my poor grammar, even though it's not really poor grammar in certain historical contexts. Ain't started out as something that the owners of slaves noticed their slaves were picking up, and that's when ain't became bad grammar. But before that, it was perfectly normal. All right, so Chanel is in the house. She says she uses 3 different spaced repetition programs along with podcast braille and digital books to learn languages. Excellent. I'd wonder what those spaced repetition programs are and what makes them great for you. Chrome Woman Walking is here. Good to see you, as always. You're finishing up a 7.5 mile walk. Wow, that's amazing. And you highlight keywords. Excellent. Shung Knight says, thanks. I actually was in your Facebook group 2 years ago. It's been a while. I don't come to train my memory with mnemonic tips. Well, glad to have you back. And wonderful to see you in Andorra. Well, I've been to Andorra once. That was an amazing trip. What a great place to see. Had a lot of fun just eating at a restaurant there. There wasn't a whole lot there, as I recall, but what a wonderful place. If it's the place that I'm thinking, in between those places in the mountains there. Really wonderful. All right. So keyword notes also. So these have been vilified as being bad. But here's the thing, and this is really going to be the reigning theme that we need to really focus on, is that it matters that you take the context into consideration. So a lot of people, they're given advice all over the internet about what is and isn't accelerated learning techniques, and they've thrown these out because they're thinking of a very particular context. And I would say that even in the context that I've seen, they're just wrong. They're not bad learning techniques at all. It's how you use it. It's how you use it in a particular context. It's how you use it with a particular strategy, which has to do with your desired outcome. It has to do with applying the strategy in context. Then you have to analyze your results and experiment to improve. So very, very important. All right. So let's see here. Daniel says, I think rereading is not only not bad, but it is probably actually fundamentally necessary. Every time one rereads something, I imagine neurons are firing. Indeed, indeed. Good point. I mean, that's what's one of the reasons why we reread, is to fire off those neurons again, refire them, or whatever's going on there. I mean, we have a poor understanding, really, of what happens in the brain. Do neurons fire? Do they refire? Do they make holes in your brain and passageways, or what's going on here? But definitely rereading is not bad. And I was very shocked when I heard that rereading was not a strategy. But by the same token, they were looking at a particular context, and even I still think that they're not right about this, but in the context that I was looking at, to be fair, it was marginally acceptable. But let's repeat this because it's really, really important. Context always matters. One of the problems is that students don't think of their context. They don't ask questions, what context am I in? And does this really apply, or will it apply? Is it possible that this applies here? And should it be a strategy for this particular thing? And you need to do this. And you got to think about your desired outcome. Literally map it out and draw the map to get to that outcome, and then apply the techniques not only in context, but with consistency inside of that context, and then analyze your results. Never treat it as the one last gig that has to be the be all and the end all. You always want to analyze everything, and then you want to experiment to improve over time. So everything that we're going to dive into today requires this as a general model, looking at your context, strategizing for a desired outcome, and being consistent about the practice. All right. So, Michelle Thomas, Mango Languages and Memorize, says Chanel. Great. So I really misunderstood you, because when you said spaced repetition program, I was thinking of software. But Michelle Thomas is not software. I don't really think of it as spaced repetition either, although it certainly has some space between the repetition. But I think it deserves a term a little bit different than that. Maricella is in the house. Hello, Maricella. You say that you are driving between Mexico and U.S. Wow. Okay. Well, we'll see you in the replay. We want you to be safe. Please no typing while driving. Okay. Good to see you though. Thanks for saying hello. And if you're just joining us, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, in the chat. Post any comments or questions as you please. So first, before that we carry on, I want to actually look through those so-called bad memory learning techniques a little bit deeper and see how we can make them better. So depending on the context, highlighting, I have found, I don't do it that much, but I have in the past highlighted names, dates, key terms, and sometimes definitions. Why? Well, not to concentrate better while I'm reading, but in a particular context, to get it later rapidly, just to be able to flip through the pages and go, that's information I need. That's information I need, instead of having to look for it, right? This is very, very important. And it's a very good strategy, actually, if you just have a certain kind of data you're trying to collect. You know that you want to recall the names of people. You know you want to recall dates. You know you want to recall key terms and definitions. There's nothing wrong with highlighting, provided you don't mind ruining up your book. There's nothing wrong with this. This is not a technique to be thrown away. You could color code these if you want. I've never found it particularly useful to sit there and hum and haw over different colors of highlighting. It's just whatever. There's alternatives to highlighting as well. So I like the marginalia dot. I'll often just put a dot right in the margins. And I believe I've just made up this term, marginalia dot, but it is exactly that, a dot that you put in the margins. And then I've used that in many ways in multiple contexts. Underlining also, and squares, circles, whatever. Develop your own system. You could, for example, if you know that you just want to rapidly look through names, you could put all names in squares. If you want to go through and have definitions only in circles, then that's fine, or brackets, whatever. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this. Again, provided you want to have your book marked up in this way. Oakman Van Oakman is here from Morocco. Thanks for the live. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you saying hello and joining us. All right. So ultimately, I don't see a problem with any of this. But again, it's context and strategy. So don't mark off anything that you're not sure that you actually need or going to use, even though you can never be sure. And we'll talk about that later. But, you can waste a lot of time with highlighting. It's true. But it has a place. It has a function in context relative to a strategy. Now, rereading they threw out as a bad strategy, but rereading is always a good idea after pre-reading and priming, and indeed even after reading the book. It's excellent after you do your note gathering and your memorization. One of the reasons why people say that you shouldn't reread is because they just haven't thought to budget and schedule the time for rereading. And again, this all comes down to context. But if you would just budget and schedule the time to rereading, it's one of the best things that you'll ever do is reread something that you've read before. And you can pre-read and reprime, and it's very, very powerful. It's very good. It's a form of repetition that makes a lot of sense, particularly when you've used some memory techniques to memorize parts of the information, because you'll seed the basic bedrock that you've laid, the soil that you've spread out over that information. Very important. And of course, rereading is something that not only have I talked about in a lot of detail, but was relatively popular with 217 shares over at magneticmemorymethod.com, the 11 reasons you should reread at least one book every month. So I got the link for you down in the description below if you want to go check that out for yourself, the full article, the podcast, and share it around if you find it useful. Because people already have, and I'm sure you will, and that really every little action like that helps tell the robots that people still care about these ancient learning techniques, and always appreciate the support with that. Andrew is here from Mackay, Queensland. Excellent. Great to see you, Andrew. Thanks for saying hello. And I'd like to visit Mackay one of these days. Sounds like a great place, and I'm not sure how far it is from Brisbane, but hopefully one day I will see it, and not just on a map. Thanks for being here. Now, in terms of keyword notes, I'm not entirely sure what is meant by keyword, and it's a bit of a problematic topic, right? Because which one's a keyword and which one isn't, right? We've got to think about that. But I think that generally we know what we mean by keywords, and it's obviously very, very key points or key themes and so forth. So you can definitely combine them with some minimal highlighting, some mind mapping, and some memory palace technique, right? The thing is that if you're using the techniques well and you have a sufficient amount of information, but you're not overdoing it, you're going to focus on keywords naturally anyway. And then when you do your rereading, you're going to fill in the gaps, and you're going to have all kinds of interesting things happen to you. So Shung Knight says, sorry to interrupt, it came to my mind, the Pomodoro technique. I don't know if you know about it. Another useful thing would be flashcards. Yeah, Pomodoro I didn't add here. I don't really think of it as an accelerated learning technique. It's a structural technique for organizing your time. And the reality is, if you need a 20-minute timer, go ahead and use it. But I don't see why that one actually needs that. I've gone to group work, and the organizer will put on a clock for 20 minutes and so forth, and it works some of the time. But here's the thing: relying on a timer is not the goal. You want to find the inner efficiency to actually just focus, regardless of whether a timer is there or not. And if you somehow train yourself or skill yourself to be linked to 20 minutes because of a timer, then you got to worry about what you're de-skilling yourself to be doing. Wouldn't it make more sense to just start to have the wherewithal through some of the other techniques that we're going to talk about to just sit down and focus? Because why place a step in front of a step if you don't have to? If you can actually train yourself to be able to just sit down and study for 20 minutes without, now I set the clock, you've just made it much more efficient. I think that the Pomodoro technique is not an accelerated learning technique at all. It's a time management technique that can help learning, but I don't think it belongs as an accelerated learning technique. It's a John Ford systemization of your productivity technique. But thank you for sharing that. And in terms of flashcards, likewise, certainly I'm doing an experiment right now with flashcards, and I've done experiments with them in the past, and they certainly have a use and a value, but they are not the accelerated learning technique. It's how you use the flashcards that is the accelerated learning technique, and that makes all the difference in the world. But the act of putting information on cards, that's not particularly accelerated. But thank you very, very much. And please interrupt further. It's not an interruption at all. This is actually here for you to engage. That's what we do this for in a live stream setting. Otherwise, we could do it on a not live stream setting. So let me know where you are in the world. If you're just joining us, hit that thumbs up and let's continue the discussion. Now, the question always comes up, and I've mentioned it already today, which keywords? Well, you don't know. And that's part of the test of life, right? That's part of how you climb the ladder of competence, is you figure out what matters, and then you demonstrate that you've been the person who had the wherewithal to figure out what matters so you can pass the exam. And I'm not just talking about exams in school, but I'm talking about exams in life. Being able to be the person who knows is how expertise evolves, and how expertise is able to come into the minds of others, because you can demonstrate that you have that expertise. So you don't get to know always what the keywords are. But in a school context, you can just ask your professor. You can ask fellow students. You can ask students from previous years. You can look at previous exams. You can call up the department secretary and say, how do I get hold of the previous exams? You can look at other books. Look for recurring themes in related books. That'll give you great clues, and it's related to an accelerated learning technique that we'll talk about in a second. But it's very, very simple to just let go of the idea that you could ever know what all of the things are that you should study, and still be the person who figures it out. That's the game. That's what makes it fun. That's what makes it interesting. If it was just as simple as this is what will be on the test, just memorize it and so forth, we would never have the wonderful society that we have, where people are able to, show off what they got, which is a very, very important part of the world. So to summarize on these supposedly bad techniques, used well, these bad approaches can actually be quite good. But you got to know your outcomes, and you've got to plan accordingly so that you can create those outcomes. And as I mentioned, be willing to let the outcome go a little bit and just not know everything with total certainty, and actually craft some new knowledge by taking the extra step, being along the extra mile, and reading a few extra books so that you are the one who is able to demonstrate your highest possible skills. All right. Reclaiming Life says, use the index of books. Absolutely. Yeah, that's another great technique. And obviously I'm not covering some of the territory we've covered before, but that's absolutely another, that's part of pre-reading, which I mentioned earlier today, to look through your indexes. Great point. Thanks for raising that. Shung Knight says, it's not exactly to organize time, actually, because the brain has a limit of concentration, and having those 5 minutes of rest kind of reboots. Can't support more tips because I already know them all. Great. Well, if you already know them all, congratulations. I don't know them all. you're ahead of me, man. You should come fly on over here from Andorra. Was it Andorra you said? And take over the show. Because if you know it all, man, you're ahead of the game. You should be running the show. I don't know it all. And I hope I never do. But congratulations to you. I think that, you're not wrong in terms of it not being just to organize the time. But I don't know that I agree that the brain has a limited concentration time that is 20 minutes and that the Pomodoro technique is worth all of the grand applause that it's given. I know certain people do give it that grand applause, but they often modify it. And so it's not really the Pomodoro technique when it's subject to so many modifications. What it is a time organization technique. And if you have decided that your brain is limited in a particular way through experimentation, then you have all the respect in the world from me if you figured that out. But if you haven't, then I would suggest that there's finer ways to organize your time than putting in a step between getting started. Oh, going to put on the timer. I've just never seen the wisdom in this, even though I've gone along with it and given it a try. If it's wise for you, though, then that's all that matters. It's just a waste of time for me. Don't need it. And I would suggest that most people don't. They just become fascinated with the logic and the terminology of it. And then people sell a lot more red tomato timers, which is great. That's the way the market works. So Shung Knight has got a lot of laughters. And have I tried meditation? Yes, I've tried meditation. I've, in fact, done more than try meditation. You might say that I've spent many, many years dedicated to the art and the craft and the science of meditation, and it's very powerful. And, I probably should add it to what we're talking about today, but I'm not sure it's an accelerated learning technique, actually, but it can enhance and aid how you learn. If you're joining us, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and let's keep the conversation going because it is a very, very important part of these live streams is to engage with you. And of course, if you're watching the replay, you can always get involved in the discussion below. And if you're new here, get subscribed to this channel and click that bell icon so you'll be notified, if indeed you will be notified, because the powers that be are not exactly doing what they're supposed to be doing. But who would like to carry on with the good stuff? So we've gotten rid of these things that certain learning experts say are bad, which I don't think are so bad. And now we got some quote unquote good stuff coming up. And the question is, what makes the good stuff coming up so good? Let me know in the chat if you want to carry on with some of the good stuff and what makes the good stuff so good. Bernie is in the house. Great to see you here, Bernie. You say Pomodoro is great for setting up a basic approach to study, what to do during that time. Accelerating learning techniques can be used. Don't pick on my tomato timer. Well, I'm not picking on your tomato timer, Bernie. I'm just picking on the fantasy that objects and timers are the actual deal. And I guess they can be great for setting up a basic approach to study for some people. And I don't villainize that. I only draw attention in a playful way to the reification of objects when the wherewithal is in your mind. And I'm not sure anyone can disagree with that. But I'm willing to they've got a platform to give it a try as we're here now. Adolfo is in the house. Good to see you, Adolfo. You are doubled, which is amazing. Wonderful. But yeah, by all means, I'm just trying to think of the last time I set a timer. I think it was really in Berlin when I was at one of these group productivity sessions. And yeah, it has its place. It has its place. Claiming Life says, the more of the good, the better for us. By all means, continue. All right, we got one person interested in continuing. Is that it? Is everybody driving their car? Let me know in the chat if you want more of the good stuff and what makes the good stuff so good. Let me know in the chat, or maybe I play bass for a while or do something else. Maybe I'll get some cards out. I can never do cards. I'm sorry. I wish I could do cards on live streams. Maybe on the balcony I can, but in these lights, I don't have any baby powder or other card powder to make my hand dry. But wow, you guys are quiet. Only Reclaiming Life is interested. Interesting. Interesting. This is where radio silence and being boring is like really difficult for me. I don't know how to wait for wait for people to engage, to actually use this technology for what it's for. Oh well. In any case, I'm sure Maricella would say to continue if she wasn't driving. Indeed. I'm always just interested. I'm interested in testing, whether like just how far the 80-20 rule goes, basically. All right. Shung Knight wants to give an example of the good stuff. Great. Well, first we want to, Daniel's listening. Excellent. We're not quite close to pushing the 80-20 rule yet, guys. Push. I think it's important to push it, don't you? I know that pushing is an important part of accelerated learning that we're going to come up to. And it's one of the things that just divides the wheat from the chaff. Googaps, number 1, would like to hear more about the good stuff. Excellent. Bernie is enthusiastic about learning. Hit us with the good stuff. Excellent. Okay, Francois, sorry. My eyes are a little backwards here. I got so many things on my screen. And Andrew is here. All right. I think we're now pushing the 80-20 rule. Pretty good. All right. So what makes the good stuff so good? Well, just as with the bad stuff or the supposedly bad stuff, we got to take into consideration context, strategy, desired outcome, the application of the strategy in context. And I would add that we also need to consider consistency with the approach. And then we need to analyze our results. And we got to experiment to improve. Francois, is that how you say it? Francois, not Francois. Francois, okay. Pedro says, what is better, concentration or split your time of study? Concentrate for a long time on a task? It's really up to you. I'm very much a long concentrating kind of person. That may be from meditation, but I think I've always been a little bit like that. And there are certainly people who work better in slow blasts or short blasts of time. Great question. And it's really for you to test, not for anybody else to decide. And it has to do with context. It has to do with the specific strategy. And it has to do with the desired outcome. So, for example, even though I'm pretty much a long-term concentration person and can tackle things for a long time, such as writing books and reading for long periods of time, etc., I know in certain other skills that short blasts actually do work. I just don't put a clock on, and I just am a little bit having fun with the Pomodoro technique and so forth. But there's also just an internal clock, and I'd rather train my internal clock. And I think that that's the higher path at the end of the day. But you can certainly use a clock to train yourself to be free of a clock, which is the higher goal, actually, I would argue. Now, examples of short-term blasts are when I taught myself juggling. I knew for just from what I know about learning, the best way to learn juggling, the quickest, was in short blasts. So that's why I never worked at it for more than 5 minutes at a time. If I were to have persisted, I probably would have had retrogressive effects. Same thing with guitar. When I'm learning something, I tend to work very short blasts at it and compile and compound onto it. But reading books and so forth, I really cannot see how that it works to read in short blasts. I think you're better off training yourself to be able to read with concentration over time and track what concentration is as you're reading and be able to find your way back if your concentration skips. Everybody's concentration breaks. There's no two ways around that. People sometimes say, well, I lost my spot and something's wrong with me. No. Everybody loses their spot. It's a long form thing, but you've got to practice the long form thing. But there are other areas, and even in language learning, short blasts, when you're initially doing it. Later, you need you will obviously need long-term abilities in language learning, because languages are things that you spend a lot of time in. You're going to spend lots of time exposed to that language if you're actually learning it. So there's no point in training yourself to have the tolerance only for short blasts of concentration. It makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. So that's a really great question, and it all comes down to context, it comes down to strategy, it comes down to the desired outcome, and application of strategy and context. And then back to the music example, when I was playing in the last band that I was in, we had to play sets that were 45 minutes long. How do you be able to do that? You practice playing for 45 minutes. Does your concentration wander? You better believe it wanders when you're on stage. You can have 400 people in a room and they're like, yeah, and your concentration will still wander. So what is the skill that you need to practice? Bringing your concentration back to where you're at in the song. It's just very, very simple. But you don't get there if you only practice in short blasts. You get there by practicing playing concerts. Actually, every concert is part of the practice of playing concerts. And before you play the concerts, you practice playing the entire set as if it were a concert in the rehearsal room. And to get there, you do sometimes practice just little passages of songs and songs independently of each other. So it's context, it's strategy, and it's both. You need both short blasts and long-term things in most areas. All right. So let's check in with the chat. Pedro says, sorry for my English. Never apologize for your English, but rather say, I'm practicing my English, and if you have questions around it, just ask. You don't have to apologize. I appreciate everybody diving in and using their English. Daniel says, content is king. Even if enough people didn't show up for you to be willing to continue with your plan to be live discussion, your followers would watch the replay. Thank you, Daniel, for the kind words, but I also think it's really important to try to use this medium to get engagement, to get people involved, because that's otherwise why do it live, right? And it's unusual too, because in a lecture, you wouldn't normally have so much back and forth, but we can sort of have this back and forth here in this way. And there will be a more compressed version of this material eventually. But the whole point here today is to be here to discuss and do something unusual, which that you don't do in lecture halls. Lecture halls, you just listen to somebody, blah, 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 and then you have questions later. Here we can just break, have a back and forth. You guys can chat with each other if you like, etc. But someone has to actually encourage the engagement. So if you're joining us, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And thank you, Daniel, for the kind words. And people do indeed watch the replays. And I never thought that that would be the case, but they do, and I appreciate it. So I'm not sure yet. It's French shoes. Okay, so I gotta try to remember this, if that's true. And you say my channel is smiley face and a heart. Awesome. Thank you for the kind words. Ronald is in the house. Thank you for being here, Ronald. I have a question that you probably weren't intending to cover. However, if you have time to address it, I would appreciate it. I indeed do have time. Thank you, Ronald. How do you stay motivated to follow all the steps for using the memory techniques fully instead of becoming lazy and trying to take shortcuts? We can indeed talk about that. Let's do that. And Reclaiming Life says, Ronald, your motivation will definitely increase as you see marked improvement, progress in your own life. Yeah, that's true. And that's kind of the answer, really. You get the motivation by getting the results. And I think that then the question is, well, how do you get started and how do you fire off all of the parts? And really, I'm not sure that there is the perfect answer to this. And part of the answer is a question to you. What is it you want to memorize and why? And is your why big enough? A lot of people, they have wants, needs, and they're not really placing them in the big, wrong direction. How do I point in the other way? The big context. What's the context of why you want to learn memory techniques? Test that. We're going to talk about that later. But it's a big thing. Believe me, there's a lot of stuff that I don't want to memorize. I was interviewed on a podcast this morning, and the host, he said, would you mind a memory test? And I said, yeah, sure, whatever. And he picked my least favorite thing to memorize, right? But I memorized it anyway and got it all back and, passed the memory test 100%. and you're just not always in life memorizing things that you want to memorize. But you got to think of it in the larger context, because I like using memory techniques, period. And part of the memory techniques and part of your skill with memory techniques is an ability with numbers. So how did I get numbers into the context of my own passion? Well, card memorization for one thing, and dates. Dates are very, very interesting to be able to memorize them. And, just reading this book about Ramus, 1515, they think he was born, died 1572. I think that's right. And now I'm tempted to go look. But in any case, the reality is that that's a way that I found more passion for numbers, was dates. And dates are something that enabled me to find more, and playing cards and so forth. But if it was just numbers for numbers' sake, or pi or something like that, I have no interest in numbers for numbers' sake or pi. But some people do. And if that's their passion and their interest, then they go for it. So that's amazing that they're able to do that. All right. So let me know if you have more questions around that, and if you care to share what your context is. But as cliche as it is sometimes, knowing your why is actually not cliche at all. And the more you know about your why, the more you can actually tweak your context and make sure that your desired outcome is actually in alignment with this purpose that you have for doing whatever it is you're doing. And then when you go, oh man, I was right, 1572, that was the date that this dude died, you just automatically get this blast of victory, and you just feel great, and then you're just excited to do it for the next time. Now, the only reason why that works, and those numbers that I memorized today, I could probably remember what they were: 6700, 36, 26, 21 was the numbers that he tested me on. But I didn't do any recall rehearsal, and I can still get them back just simply because of the sort of images. But to follow through the rest of the steps, I would need to have a damn good reason to go and do the rest of the steps. But if you have a proper reason, such as your knowledge project or whatever, and you memorize some dates around that, your desire to be intimately intertwined with that knowledge and have those dates, and what the power of what those dates can do for you when you interconnect them with other dates that are going to surround this, the other dates of other figures, the other dates of other events. Wow, like it just gets better and better and better and better. And your knowledge and your wisdom and all these things just get better and better and better. So embed it in a context, and then it's amazing what's going to happen to you. So hope that helps you out. And, by all means, ask questions that are off topic. The topic here is memory, and I always appreciate really great questions like yours. So if you're joining us, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and let's carry on with the chat here. Shung Knight says, meditation helped me to boost my memory and concentration between other good stuff, and organizing myself helped me study in a better way and faster. Bam. Awesome to that. Shung Knight says, tips to stay motivated. I'd say put some music that motivates you. Remind yourself why you do it, the reason, and make fun. Awesome. Yeah, music is a hit or miss, but music can be a great thing. I often write to the same album and edit to the same album, and it's not about motivation, though. It's actually some sort of anchoring or, I don't know, conditioning. It's not. I don't really wait for motivation. So I would suggest that music could be more of a conditioning trigger rather than motivation. Maybe I'm just playing semantics, but I think there's actually a difference if you think it through. And Shung Knight likes the Iron Man mug. All right, thumbs up to Iron Man. Bam! He doesn't show up so good with the outer space, but kind of cool. Wow, data. We're doing art here. All right. Dua is here. Hello, Dua. Thanks for being here. You say, lately I've been teaching myself how to teach myself Spanish. By the way, Google Translate is a big help. Very cool app. Shung Knight says, well, thank you, first of all, for being here, Dua. And amazing that you're teaching yourself Spanish. I like how you put it. Teaching myself how to teach myself Spanish. Bang on. I like that. Shung Knight calls Google Translate into question, which is good, and it's not able to translate everything. Shung Knight, if you know better apps, you say try better apps. What are the better apps? Please let us know. enlighten us. Chanel says, I'm the only one in my family. Back, you remember dates. I pretty much remember the day people are born or the people die on the mother's side of my family. I'm the only one that can do this. People thought it was strange because I can't remember dates, but I also can remember whole facts of information. I think it's all about what you're interested in. Sometimes you can't remember things you're not interested in just for that particular moment. And yeah, I mean, interest. But when we're talking about dates, actually, we're talking about a specific technique, Chanel. We're talking about the major, and it doesn't matter whether you're passionate or not. If you just know the major, you'll be able to memorize them. The question is, are you embedding them in a larger passion project? So my question would be for you is, do you have a particular passion for your family? And to what extent is that influencing some sort of strategy that you might have around this that causes you to focus on those particular dates rather than others? So some self-analysis might be interesting there, and whether you want to share that or not is up to you. Fanshu says, which is better, study in solo or solo in, I'm not sure I understand the question, in a study group? I think both. I would mix both. Depends on the topic, depends on the context. Shung Knight says, movies with subtitles, flashcards, find native people who give you homework, memorize. Well, memorize can be just as questionable as anything else, and I thought you meant maybe translation software. Bernie says, I wanted to ask if you looked into Sans Fregetica. I ran a Google search and suddenly fonts and memory is a big issue. Are fonts important to learning? I don't think so, but I'm willing to listen. I have looked into Sans Fregetica and I forgot about it because it just didn't look that interesting to me. Look, there's an obvious way that fonts are important to learning. It's very obvious. If you find it painful to read that text, then it's going to impede you. There are many books where I look at the font and I'm just like, particularly novels, there's no way I'm going to read a novel in that font. So do fonts have something to do with how people are going to learn? Absolutely. I remember reading a Bruno Latour book, and I had to read it, but I never would have read it if it was my personal choice because the font was so terrible. I have no idea what that company was thinking, but they may have had a target audience in mind and may have pleased the pants off of that audience. I have no idea, but man, it was brutal, and it did impede in a particular way because I took no joy in reading an otherwise really kind of cool book, and it slowed things down because it was just there. So there's just an obvious on the surface way that font can be part of learning because it can impede your pleasure. It can tire your eyes for sure. And I'm sure there's some other things, but let's take this back a step, Bernie, and look at just the general display of information. It's not just about font. It's about information display. And Carolyn, who I don't think is here right now, but maybe she is. She just might not be typing in on the chat. She raised a point that is very, very important in terms of learning the major, for example, or any card memorization technique that involves something like the major, which they almost certainly will. The way that a person first encounters what the work might be involved is really important. And I never thought about it that way. And you don't necessarily have equality across the board. And it makes sense because I never saw the card system that she learned presented in any way like that when I first came into it. The way I came into it was almost just like discussion, oral. And it obviously matches my oral sort of way. And I had that exposure to it before I ever saw a grid, right? But if I had seen that grid first, I probably would have thought, ooh, that's a lot. And I would then have to call upon my wherewithal, like I did with the Bruno Latour book, which I believe is called Aramis or The Love of Technology, which is a great book, just horrid print in the edition that I saw, horrid font. But if I had seen the major that way, I would have had to call upon that same strategy of saying, well, you have to read this anyway, so how are you going to get it done? mindset change. Just get it done. And so on. Same thing with all sorts of character grids and things that you see. So I don't think that I wouldn't dismiss what they're saying, but I'm not sure that they have a solution. And one of the reasons why it's so obvious they don't have a solution is because even if you could have this little electrode that you tap on here, and then all of a sudden all the text in the world is in your preferred font, first of all, you would probably get tired of that font because you just start to see it everywhere, and fonts can be different, and you would de-skill your tolerance for different fonts as you created a de-skilling of your abilities with that through, let's call it font exhaustion. I'm just predicting here, speculating. So I don't think that that's a fix. And the other problem is that font is just one door that you got to kick through in the world of learning. So then you'll have all kinds of things like different terminology that they're using. Every book you read, you might be reading the same topic and the author is using the same terminology, but then they're using different analogies, and those analogies are somehow, you got to reconfigure yourself all the time. So I think it's one of the reasons why I just sort of forgot about it, so to speak, but not in such a way that I didn't recognize it when you put it there, is because it just seems like the wrong battle to be fighting. Rather, the battle to be fighting is, how do we create tolerance and skill for learning regardless of the information display? How do we learn to deal with information display? How do we as individuals stop farting around with our little, ooh, it's too hard, and ooh, it's too much, and just get it done? Get it done, right? That's what we need to battle. That's the only battle. The other stuff and optimization of everything on the internet is never going to work in the ways that people suppose. And I could eat my own words later. Oh, they'll figure it out. And maybe Neuralink, they'll just and everything will just be utopia. Yeah, right. Humans have proven one thing so far, undeniably. The only thing that humans have proven beyond a doubt, and I mean proof in the real sense of proof. It's not just evidence, but they've proven this without a doubt, is that they're horrible at predicting the future. Humans are terrible at predicting the future. This is proven beyond a doubt. They're just terrible at it. But at the same time, they have this magical ability to somehow make things like Star Trek still happen. At least in terms of communication devices. And do even better. So, it's half of one, six of one, half a dozen of the other. However that saying goes. I never memorized it. David is in the house. Good to see you, David. Bernie says, what? No magic solution? Buzzkill. You had a buzz? What got you so buzzed? Share with me what's better than meditation for auto buzz. All right. So, Reclaiming Life says to friend Shu, whatever way gives you the best results. Personally, you need to learn your own ways of learning best. Personally, I like to first learn on my own, then practice with others. Yeah, I think that's great. Sometimes in life, you're just thrown in with others, and then you got to go learn it on your own, and so on and so forth. Sean is here from Jersey, checking in. Awesome. Glad to see you here, and you say thank you for all the great feedback. Such a big help. My pleasure, Sean. And if you're just joining us, please do say hello. Hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world. And we got some more buzz kills coming for sure, Bernie, because we're here to talk about reality and just get ahead. So now let's get into these. And if I missed saying good evening to David, thank you for being here, David. Really appreciate seeing you again. Always wonderful. Let's get into what is commonly accepted as accelerated learning techniques. Again, I just was poking around those ones that were called bad learning techniques. That was somebody else's opinion. Not really so convinced by their arguments. Not sure I corrected their arguments, but I did some efforts there. And it doesn't matter whether they're good, bad, or whatever. What matters is the context, the strategy, what outcome you desire, and how you're going to apply them in context with consistency and look at your results. This is the hard work that a lot of people won't do, is actually analyze the results. But yet that's where so much of the absolute ability to grow comes from. And then experiment. Be willing to experiment so that you can improve. Really, really important. And believe me, if you're not willing to do it for yourself, there are people studying you right now, and they are doing all kinds of internet-y things because they're willing to analyze results and they're willing to experiment to improve. And you will be seeing advertisements as a result of their willingness to do so. And they will continue to get better. And then, maybe they'll sell you something eventually, or maybe they won't. But we're now in this internet world that is just completely focused on optimizing everything to the nth degree within a particular system. And that's the same thing with learning. The people who will do this self-analysis and correct and experiment to improve and apply things consistently, they're the ones who will win in the world of learning. So there's parallels across the board in every area, in medicine, in the law, in politics, whatever. It's just, well, politics maybe a little less so. They seem to like inefficiency. But there seems to even be a science to their inefficiency and some testing, even if it's a little bit strange and behind. All right, so let's carry on with some of these. And again, these are not necessarily ones that I have called accelerated learning. They are called accelerated learning by others. And self-explanation is one of the big ones. So what is self-explanation? Well, there's a lot of different things that we could talk about in self-explanation. The Feynman technique often comes up. We won't get into it now because we've talked about it oodles of time on live streams, so you can search that up if you want to watch previous live streams. Then you could just do your own progress checks and summarize in your own words where you're at. You can take practice tests. You can often, books have practice tests in them, or you can look on the internet for practice tests about what it is that you're doing. You can also fill in the gaps with brute force learning. This is not cramming. It sounds like cramming. But when in your self-explanation process, you find gaps in what it is that you learn, instead of, well, I don't understand, and allowing the evil Dr. Forget to rule the brain, I'm going to understand. This is not something that I get. And I'm going to write out what it is I don't get, and then I'm going to seek something that will fill the gaps. That's self-explanation in a nutshell. Self-explanation also, my wife caught me the other day walking out, and I'm just talking. And I was just explaining to myself something that I was trying to understand. And she's like, who are you talking to? And I was like, oh, I just talked. Every time she catches, quote unquote, catches me, it's just talking to myself. But it's a very, very important part of actually figuring things out. And you see this sometimes, they make a big deal out of it in the movies when they're showing you these movies about smart people. They're walking and talking to themselves. It's not based in fantasy. It's actually a strategy. It's oral enunciation of things that your brain is processing, which then you hear in your ears, which gives you another layer of processing, which then returns it into your brain, which leads to another layer of processing. You see it from multiple contexts. You hear it. Your muscle memory of your mouth gets involved. And these days you can do it no problem because everybody's walking down the street talking to themselves. They just happen to be, talking to someone on the phone or whatever. Nobody cares. You just walk around. You're not going to be hauled off in a straitjacket. So Shung Knight likes the Feynman technique. Well, you might want to go check out some of those previous live streams where I've talked about it, because I've modified it, and you might enjoy that. All right, so this is considered an accelerated learning technique, and I would just call it a normal learning technique. It's just that we call it accelerated when you don't know how to do it, and it helps you, and it helps you faster, which it will. It will help you learn faster, but a lot of people don't know how to do it. Now, it's related to the next one, which is elaboration. And elaboration is a mental process, which you can also use involved with writing, which is just to simply ask yourself questions repeatedly. Who, what, when, where, why, how, etc. And, again, it's a context thing, but it's very, very powerful. Even if you were dealing with extraordinarily difficult mathematical equations or physics formulas or whatever, you could ask these questions. Who came up with this? What were they doing with it? When did they come up with it? Where were they when they came up with it? Why did they come up with it? How exactly did they come up with it? If you get curious about that stuff, you can find that stuff out, and it'll actually help you learn it. It'll help you learn it because you create more hooks. Those hooks can be useful in a memory palace, and you're just giving yourself more field in which for that theorem to live, to have soil in which to grow. It's very, very powerful. And you can ask it of just about anything under the sun. There may not be an answer to every single question, but where there is, it could be extraordinarily useful because you're giving yourself context. Historical context can be very, very important. Maybe not always, but I'd say almost always. There's some historical context to everything that can help you learn it better, whatever it is. And it's worth taking the time to see it in history. And the more you look at historical context, the more you're able to bring context together and compound context. And that is a memory aid and a learning aid over the long term because you have more mental Lego to connect things together with. It's just simple. Comparison and contrast, and this is very important as well. You can compare things historically, you can compare things geographically, you can compare things geohistorically, you can compare things in many, many different ways, you can contrast them in many, many different ways. Very, very powerful. And then, of course, the consequences of things are very important to know. So, in some sense, all of this falls generally under the who, what, when, where, why, and how, but they're granular, ways of twitching the kaleidoscope a little bit to get better results. Now we got more coming, but let's check in with the chat. Pedro says there are some pitfalls when you accelerate learning. You cannot use fast learning if you're not near a deadline because you will only memorize and not learning in real. Well, that's true, Pedro, but accelerated learning I don't think has anything to do with deadlines. It has to do with the strategy that you use and you craft over time, and that's not a pitfall. The pitfall is not being prepared beforehand, and it's not really fast learning accelerated. I don't think accelerated is the same thing as fast. I don't see those as being necessarily related. Sean says, when I read material, I'll read it with the mindset of teaching or explaining it to someone. And when I do explain it, I can find out where I might be lacking in certain understanding. Background knowledge helps, who the author is, what year it was written, and what the author might have been experiencing. Absolutely. Exactly what I'm talking about. Absolutely what I'm talking about. Andrew says, that is so true. Understanding the past helps understand now and the future. Yes, Andrew. But it's not a guarantee. I really dislike that saying, he who knows the past, or he who does not know the past is doomed to repeat it, or whatever. I don't think so. There's all kinds of people who know their history very well, and they still repeat the same old crap. So, but yeah, generally knowing the past does help us not only understand the now and potentially make better predictions for the future, but it just helps us be more tolerant of the way the world is. And that's a very powerful survival technique. Pedro says historical context is useful for literature learning. Indeed, indeed. Matthew says, enter the Prussians versus Napoleon. Indeed. All right. Now, another accelerated learning technique is coming right up after we take this quick break. See you in a minute.
384626 4338 32795028 841971 69 399375.
Hi, my name is Paul, and I've taken a few courses by Anthony Metivier, but I felt that the experience of doing it today live was the biggest advantage. Anthony has a gift in simplifying complex concepts, and I feel that I've really come away today with practical skills that I can now use effectively. It was great to immerse ourselves in the situation, to be able to apply the time, because when we're at home we may not take the time to do the memory exercises that we were doing today. I felt particularly that the thing that we did at the end of today was something that is totally unique in memory training, which is 3 days of memory, which is how to practice your skills. I've read many memory books and I've never come across a system laid out as to how to practice what you've learned. And this is what I gained today from Anthony's course. So I'd give it 10 out of 10. Thank you.
53 42 1170 679.
All right, and we are back. So carrying on, we've got elaboration, very key technique, and then we have proper goal setting. So this is a huge thing. We've been talking about it a little bit already in terms of having, some sort of why and a purpose to what you're doing that is a real purpose. But let's talk about it a little bit more. And it's really important to think this through in many cases, because young people are often pushed in life to make decisions a little sooner than perhaps is wise about the career path that they're going to have. And you, if you're a parent, might consider these things, or if you are a student about to enter university, you might consider these things. Or if you're a student who needs to change directions, you might consider these things. So proper goal setting, what exactly is proper? Well, that's something you're going to have to figure out along the way by setting some goals and seeing what happens when you do this. But one of the key things that I've been lucky to avoid mostly and get out of in time enough is things that lead you into golden handcuffs. So what are golden handcuffs? Golden handcuffs are when you're actually successful in completing goals and then you wind up miserable because it wasn't what you really wanted to do. So there's all kinds of people out there who became lawyers, who became doctors, who became teachers, and they're just miserable because what they had really wanted to do was something else. And this is complicated because sometimes people do the thing that they want to do, but they never achieve the success that they want from that. So they may go and be a painter or an author or whatever, and then they may have problems because they didn't achieve whatever success they were looking for there. However, that's a mindset thing and an attitude thing, and if you just did it for a particular number in a bank account or a particular number of fans or whatever you did, then that's just golden handcuffs, isn't it? So you got to avoid all of this and set goals so that they are goals that you can actually accomplish, that you actually want the outcome of, and that help you grow beyond that and give you options so that you're able to go in different directions after you've accomplished a certain level of goal. So we'd have to, get some specific examples going, but I think just on a general abstract level, what is meant here is that there's just lots of doctors out there who really didn't want to be doctors, but they went and did it anyway to feed their family, of course, but to make their family happy that their parents wanted them to be or whatever. And it can be very common in certain cultures that you just don't get a choice. But you may be able to kick your foot in the door and assert more choice by thinking this through, and then just having healthy and realistic attitudes about what success really means. So for most people who love writing, for example, they're just happy as peaches if they can pay the rent and get to spend time doing what they love, which is writing. And that's great. But if they were to say, well, and this happened, I saw this a lot when I was in the literature community a lot in Toronto. There are people who would just nag out on Stephen King so much, and they would call themselves masters of their craft, and they would sell maybe 14 copies of their book. And that would be to the 14 people who showed up to their reading, and they would make their living as a creative writing professor, right? And they were masters of their craft. Well, I don't think so. I mean, I would have no bones with them if they didn't sit there and crap all over someone like Stephen King, because that dude is a master of the craft for sure, given the level of success there, but also the consistency of that over time, and the ability to reflect on it from a meta level and help others reach that level, and really without many bad things to say about anybody. I mean, I think he doesn't like Kubrick's version of The Shining, and other than that, he really doesn't nag out on people very much. But anyway, this is an accelerated learning technique, because if you can keep yourself on a goal that you actually want and you've thought it through, then you're much more likely to go a lot faster and with greater integrity and thoroughness, even if you're not faster, because fast is not necessarily the goal. It's not even an option in some areas of expertise and artistry. And you're able ultimately just to have more options when you get out on the other end, because you've learned the skills that got you there, which you can then apply to something else, or they otherwise snap into something that is pre-existing that you can dive into. Now, in terms of what I mean by existing competence, a lot of people are just creating goals that require smaller goals on the way to the bigger goal, and life will change. Adventures will take you in other directions, so some more comprehensive study is useful there in terms of what it is you really want in life. But then think about, what is it you could actually do? What is it you can do today relative to all the things that need to be done in order to get there? And then maybe think of other ways to get to places if it's not right. Then you have to think too about the challenge frustration curve, because as you go, you may find that you get progressively bored as things get easier, and boredom can be a very torturous thing. So you want to make sure that you are getting sufficient challenge, but you also want to make sure you're not being so frustrated that you just give up and you're tired out. So that's very important. And then you want to think about the 80-20 rule, which we've talked a lot about in previous live streams. So we can just mention it in passing now, but generally, if you can think about what it is that you can focus on in a goal, that is the biggest lever that's going to help you get where you need to go as thoroughly as possible, and perhaps as quickly as possible if that's an option, then you're going to be able to harness the 80-20 rule all over the place. As Sean says, take the road less traveled. Indeed. And that can be a difficult thing. It can be scary because it's lonely out there, but maybe not so lonely as it seems when you have a good meditation practice and you become aware of what you really are as an entity in the world. And Sean says, goal setting must be simple, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, something I've used over the years. Yeah, I would just say that it doesn't have to be simple. Actually, I'll get into this a little bit more, but I don't think that simple is necessarily the case. And measurable, yes, but then you need to think about, what are we measuring? What does attainable mean? I mean, I think you're right, but those like SMART goals, that's thrown around without a lot of interrogation, and we need to think, get more granular. Because time-bound, what does that mean? Not everything is actually time-bound. Like, for example, in the case of being an author, you're not really bound by time in the same way that other people are bound by time. And even if you're in university and you have to write essays, time is not necessarily the same thing in reading as it is, or writing, as it is in reading. And it's not necessarily the same thing. We've got to... I'm not a big fan of SMART goals anyway, but as you may know, I'm a fan of acronyms, but I'm not a fan of simplifying things, because the world is not simple. The world is not simple, and we'll get to that. But it is there are things that are optimizable, and often these ways that we optimize them actually are against the success of other people. When some of us get it and others don't. And I'm very concerned with the people who don't, and often it's because we've just made it mush, and it's just not that simple some of the time, and more often than not. All right, so another accelerated learning technique is to remove or at least manage distractions. And we say this, but then, what do we mean? Well, we've got to look a little deeper and talk about the difference between internal and external distractions. And I would suggest that most people have internal distractions that are way bigger and nastier and meaner than external distractions. The external stuff really doesn't matter if you haven't gotten the insides taken care of. And mindset is a big one. It's a huge one. We can go all day about the stories that people say to themselves in their minds. I've said all kinds of stories to myself inside my mind. Horrible, horrible things that really have no place in an intelligent mind. And yet they were there nonetheless. And it happens. And sometimes the people who are the smartest, their smarts work against them, because they're able to reason and ration all kinds of negativity, not only into place, but to cement it with incredible logical systems that verify the validity of all that negativity. And it can be very difficult to change as a result because of the wizardry that went into putting that negativity there in the first place. But it's still the beast that needs to be battled, and there are many ways to do it. And if you need to reach out for help, then that's one thing you need to do. I needed to. I spent lots of years in therapy to unwind strange and bizarre stories that I was telling myself, or that was just appearing in consciousness. And I'm glad I did. All right. Now, the other thing is, as we've already talked about, a lot of people will have the internal distraction of not having enough competence. So when they're ahead of the curve, they're just getting frustrated, and they just need to go back, take a step back, and cover some of the fundamentals. And then the problem here is that it's not universally true. There's all kinds of areas in life in which, you can skip ahead, and you see others skipping ahead. And so it's really up to the context. It's up to the situation that you're in. And diet and sleep, of course, are huge. And we hear it on the news all the time. And, do we do something about it? That's entirely up to you. But it's very, very a big part of things. It's a big part of how your memory works. It's a big part of how you ever are able to develop competence in anything. And it's a part of your mindset. And we all know this. And we don't have to get into cliches to just say that sometimes things do feel better after a good night's rest. Another accelerated learning technique is multisensory learning. Again, this is context-based, but there's a lot of different kinds of ways that you can be multisensory. Very generally, when we're talking about textbook learning and so forth, the big five is huge, which is learning with listening, reading, writing, and speaking, ideally with a memory technique in place that's going to help you be able to read, write, speak, and listen from memory in a way that then reasserts what's going on in your memory. And in some contexts, distributed practice is necessary. In the case of memory techniques, you're going to be doing distributive practice just by virtue of what you're doing, because that's the way the memory techniques work. But another thing about multisensory learning that I don't think is taken into account enough is actually learning in different contexts, different locations. And some schools are great about this. They get you to go to different countries for a certain period of time, etc. But even in your own hometown, like going and studying in different libraries and going and studying in different cafes and different parks and all that sort of stuff. Maybe I just can have to rely on my own anecdotal experience, but that's really helped me a lot, is to go and wander around. And I think of it still. I used to, but I still do. Think of it as road work. That's the term that I picked up from Gary Halbert. But I did it long before I heard that, but then I adopted that from him. But road work is essentially just going from place to place. And this sort of lends itself a little bit to what we were talking about with the Pareto technique, or Pomodoro, sorry. Mind blip there. But it relates to it in a sense, but I would do it a little bit differently. So I go to a cafe and I would just work there until nature called. And then I would walk to the next cafe and work there and just repeat that. And so it was not 20 minutes, and it didn't need a clock, but it had something like that clock. It was the clock of nature. Or I would stay longer if I wanted to. But something about work, move, it has been very, very good for me. And it, in terms of the memory palace, it's very, very good because you get multisensory learning in terms of being able to use different colors in different rooms, the different, what do you call them, servers at different cafes. They can all become different bridging figures. You hear the sounds of their voice, the way they dress, etc. It becomes very, very multisensory. And then as you're walking, you're thinking back what you were doing in that previous memory palace, and you know which one you're going to next, and you can think about what you did there the day before and run that through. While you have the beauty of the city around, the fresh, crisp air, assuming I'm just having an image of Berlin when the air is fresh and crisp, which is a lot of the time, and it's just an amazing place and an amazing way to operate. Moving, changing context. Maybe not for everybody, but I've always been a bit of a nomad, and it certainly has worked for me. Sean says, meditation and mindfulness can help with learning to calm your internal voice. You talked about it in your past video with Ben. Yes, indeed. Meditation and mindfulness is huge. I'm not entirely sure I would call it an accelerated learning technique, but you can do a lot of learning in your meditation by reviewing your memory palaces. All right. Reclaiming Life says, I enjoy reading and writing at random places, normally just a little off trails, in the woods. When hiking to from them gives good reflection time. Yep. Yeah, there's lots of wonderful things to be done, and you can write anywhere. You can read just about anywhere. And you can read and write. You can take your notes just about anywhere. These, like, if you're doing what I love to do, these come in different sizes. They fit in pockets. There's all kinds of notebooks that have different sizes, and lots of ways to take notes. And you certainly could, if you want, just narrate your notes when you're reading. I tend not to like to do that because I don't like to break what I'm doing with a foray into digitalia, but certainly can do that sort of thing. All right, so the next thing that you can consider is the role of coaches and mentors. And this comes back to also that notion of a study group. The thing with the study group, though, is that many of the people in your study group, if not all of them, will not necessarily be on the other side of where you want to get. So coaches and mentors are huge for accelerating your learning. And if you don't have one, you should really consider figuring out how you can get one, because it's a great way to accelerate your learning, because not only do you have the actual expertise of the person who's gotten where you want to get on tap, so to speak, but they also can see what you're doing with a granular level of detail that someone who is not at that place that you want to get can never see. They won't pick up the details. They won't, been there, done that. And if you get a good one, they'll, be honest and say, I don't know whether that's going to work for you or not, but when I did this, you may want to consider this. And then they give you a sort of counter narrative of where things could potentially go if you go that way, because they just have the context. They have that passage through things. But if you're in a situation where you can't get coaches and mentors, you can certainly do something that Tim Ferriss has talked about, which is the DISC. Now, there's no actual I in the DISC, which is why I have I equals 0, but it's just a word that it allows you to get it into a word for DSSS. And essentially, the Tim Ferriss sort of accelerated learning approach involves deconstructing what is happening with a top performer or someone who's an expert in a particular thing, but not just what actually works, but knowing the failure points, knowing what can go wrong, and having strategies to avoid them. And that's one of the reasons I just mentioned that you want coaches and mentors who are able to analyze where you're at, because they can see through their own experience, oh no, that's the path you definitely don't want to go down. You want to avoid that. And but you can also just listen to interviews with experts, and they will sometimes expose, and often the whole interview is about the failure points that they went through that you don't have to go through. So deconstructing what led to success always involves figuring out what is going to be a barrier to success as well. And knowing those failure points then allows you to actually really work on the things that lead to those failure points and get them out. So to take a simple metaphor, if you're learning something like the classic pass in Magic or whatever, and you know what some of the tells are, you figure out what the tells are, then you can work on eliminating those. You can actually make a plan for how you're going to practice, so that if these are the 5 common tells, the pinky hanging out or whatever the case may be, you can actually work on that. And it's very, very important. So it's not just about the smooth outcome. It's about also knowing what's going to impede it. Then selection from similarity is really important. So this is kind of the meta learning, knowing how to learn and what it was that you would learn and what's common to different things. So for example, if you're going to learn a language and you want to learn multiple languages, then you would, in this particular idea, you would start with the second language where you started with the first language and craft for yourself a modus operandi, for example. So you would have certain vocabulary that you nail first and really nail it and focus on it, and then develop from there. So that's selection from similarity. And then study, of course, is exactly what it sounds like. You got to put in the study, but study the context, all those things that we talked about earlier, and then have some stakes. And having stakes is really, really important. It means you got some skin in the game. Invest in yourself. Make sure you get the best possible training you can get. Make sure that you have some coaching and mentorship if that's relevant there. And also have something you want out of it at the end. Have something you're going to do. Now, Tim Ferriss has talked about certain things where you sign up where you get penalized monetarily if you don't reach a goal or whatever. I never really got into that, but I guess it works for some people. And that's also what is meant by having stakes in the process. But there's lots of things that it can mean. But anyway, I've always thought that was a pretty interesting a way of characterizing an accelerated learning technique. And he certainly has done some interesting work around demonstrating how that plays out over time and how quickly it can go. Claiming Life says I equals unit. Not sure I follow, but I'm not sure I have the IQ for it. Mr. Space is in the house. It's been a while, but I'm glad to be here. Mr. Space, it has been a while, and I'm glad that you're here. Mr. Space says that he is always learning new things from us, let's call it, this community. Thank you for the kind words. Nick says, learning for me personally is not about absorbing knowledge. It's the joy of practicing and combining it. Great. Thanks for being here, Nick. Good to see you. Yeah, I would say that that's a good policy. I mean, what would you have knowledge for if you weren't going to practice it? Sometimes it's normal, though, to just want to know. Faust had his problem, and he was, things didn't, depending on which version you read, things didn't turn out all that well for him. But we're sympathetic to the Faust character because we all know what it's like to want knowledge for knowledge's sake. But one of the lessons in Faust is that knowledge is for practice, and it is for practice to a virtual or virtuous end. And that's very important. Sean asks, can studying for too long be a problem? I find after about 90 minutes I'm done, and I find that before a test I'll usually not review notes and do something totally different and relax. Yeah, well, I mean, I would say doing anything for too long can be a problem. It's really a matter of context and you got to hit the reset button for sure, and not overdo it. I think that if you put it into a specific context, what you're studying for, I think that you could actually extend that 90 minutes in a way that's actually very, very healthy, but it really depends. And I just don't know the context. But if we were to just randomly give an example of how that might work, let's say you've got an exam in, I don't know, some exam about psychology, and you're going to need to cover certain things. After 90 minutes, you're totally fried on reading your Psychology 101 textbook. Well, if you wanted to get more in, and you wanted to actually do it in a way that energizes you and vivifies you, and I'm speaking from experience because I've done this and I've been tired, one thing you can do is go and find out another person who teaches in a completely different medium and go and just hear it all over again from a completely different angle. So it used to be called the Teaching Company. Now I guess it's called the Great Courses. And when I had to go through Freud and psychology in university, I would read Freud. Freud is not easy to read. The translation in English is pretty bad. I didn't know German at the time. And even in German, he's not necessarily an easy read. But I found what was called the Teaching Company back then, and I just gobbled down Daniel N. Robinson and just went crazy on that stuff. And that gave me not only an extra hour, but that guy is so awesome. He's like funny to listen to. He's just really got a lot of mannerisms and so forth. And he's just so intelligent and smart and refers to all kinds of things. You just get energized and you're like, oh, he's talking about that now. I want to check that out. And, it was a really, really great thing. So that's just a key sort of example of how to keep going. And I never found that it had retrogressive elements. I never found that it damaged my progress. I found that it actually increased it. Then I'd go back and read Freud with greater energy, greater interest, because I then heard it from a different perspective. Then I go to the library and start to look up, well, who else has talked about Freud? And what do they have to say about it? What does a Marxist have to say about Freud? What does a feminist have to say about Freud? What does film studies have to say about Freud, et cetera, and just compound all this on. Within a day or two, you're not by any means an established scholar of Freud, but you know more than 99% of the population, especially if you throw in some memory techniques in there to help you out. And I hope you do. So studying for too long obviously can be a problem. You don't want to burn yourself out. But the question is, do you have to cap out at 90 minutes? Does that have to be the end? You'd have to take that in your own context and figure it out. And to be fair, I was just so switched on with what I was doing that you couldn't stop me. I did have the Faust problem, so to speak, but it wasn't really a problem because I was just so in love with what I was doing. I had evaded the golden handcuffs problem, and for many years I was just in total bliss. And you can think about how that might be possible, even if it's not possible now inside of your own area of study. And it certainly does work to be able to do that. Nick says, if you don't use it, you lose it. And studying can be very relaxing after a hardworking day. Studying is my reset button. Yeah, exactly. So it really comes back to the point that we started with, is that context is the key here. And we really need to not use the term accelerated learning techniques as a blanket term, as if it means something across the board. It's something that's different for different things. And as Nick is saying, studying as a reset button. Myself too. I don't know why. I wish it wasn't the case, but I can no longer really read fiction. I find fiction just absolutely boring. And so my best thing is just to go read more stuff about memory because I just enjoy it, and look more into the history of memory, more in the science, and just chill out with a heavy-duty scientific article. It's a lot of fun. So really, I think that one of the key points I want to get across here is that everybody's looking for simplification, and everything should be simple and yada yada. I don't think that's the case at all. The information is not simple. Information is very, very complex, and I think that if we just take the Tim Ferriss model that we just looked at, it's not talking about simplifying. Deconstruction is not simplifying. It's looking complexity in the eye. It's organizing. It's planning, which you may need to plan your time to organize. This is not necessarily in order, but you got to organize and plan, and then you got to organize again sometimes, and then you got to start. You got to get started, and then you got to understand that once you're started, things may look very, very differently on the other side, and then start again when necessary. If you fall off the horse, then you just got to get a strategy for getting back on the horse. And it's just that simple. It's just that simple. Mr. Space says, yes, I'm looking for simple things. I'm lazy. Well, Mr. Space, I don't know you, but I know you from our live streams, but that may, I don't know, but that may be what holds you back, and it can hold you back for the rest of your life. If you're just looking for simplicity, it ain't on this planet. There are some things that are extraordinarily beautiful, but I've never seen a thing in my life that was simple. I have never seen a thing that was simple. Look at this image here behind me. Isn't that the most complex simplicity that there is? Yes, it's simple. It's the sky and all that sort of stuff. But its simplicity comes from extraordinarily ununderstandable complexity. And it's really the people who dive in and grab the bull by the horns despite the complexity that are going to win. And believe me, there are places in my life where I'm just not willing to wrap my hands around the horns of certain complexity. But you just got to acknowledge that when that happens. And I know that the people who win in those areas that I'm not willing to wrangle with, they're winning because they are the ones who are willing to figure out that complexity, or they're willing to invest to have it figured out, etc. And when you can just, call a spade, then you can stop self-punishing yourself if that's what you're doing. Because if you're just like, yeah, I'm lazy, then just okay. Enough said. But if you actually really want something, then the best thing to do is not sit around trying to simplify everything to the nth degree. It's to look complexity in the eye. And then if there are simple things, and they're legitimately simple, by all means harness them. But don't harness them in such a way that you actually end up leading yourself into traps later. I have many times, and I never thought I would have an experience with it personally, but I've seen many times where everything just falls apart because they offload so many things that have been simplified, and they're not watching over it, and then it just crumbles to pieces, and they have a very hard time building it together again because they've de-skilled themselves at even understanding what it was that they built. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of looking for simple, because I just don't see where that it exists. Not that you can't harness certain things that are easier or effective, etc. But even then, you've got to have discernment and make sure that you don't turn something that seems simple and attractive into a trap that punishes you later. Lady B is in the house. Good to see you, Lady B. Thanks for being here. Thanks for saying hello. If you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And Lady B, if you're new here, please get subscribed if you're not already. And let me know your question. Feel free to type it in. Nick says, just as no one is enthusiastic, motivated, and productive all the time, no one is born lazy. These are not permanent traits. They're just temporary states of mind. You're just not motivated enough. Yeah, that can be. We don't know Mr. Space. But one of the things that I would say is that motivation is not necessarily the answer. Motivation is something that I find comes from doing once you get moving. If I waited for motivation, if I wanted to have enough motivation, I don't think anything would get done. It's not necessarily about motivation. I don't necessarily know all the answers for all things, but I'm not sure that it's a just not motivated thing. And one of the reasons why that is so easy to follow through is that there can be diet things, there can be sleep issues, there can be all kinds of complexities in life where motivation is just never a satisfying explanation. Mr. Space says, I lose interest on topics after a while and switch to something else. So, yeah, well, I mean, why do you lose interest? Do you really lose interest, or is it that things get complicated, or what is it? We can generalize or we can be specific. This is your opportunity to do so if you like. And Nick says, appetite comes with eating, desire or facility increases as an activity proceeds. That can be, yeah. But you know me, Nick, I almost have sometimes the opposite issue where I have to force myself to eat after I start eating, and I also I have to find ways to actually figure out how not to work, because I'm not able to shut down. So I may not be the best advisor of all these things. As Mr. Space says, it gets complicated. I would just suggest look that complexity in the eye, and if you want to figure it out, you can figure it out. One of the key indicators that I've observed across top performers around the world is that they're just stubborn about figuring it out. They're going to get there one way or another. Now, where there is not something anyone can anticipate, but they're stubborn to a certain degree. Can you invent that stubbornness in yourself? I really don't know. But I would say that if your answer is it gets complicated, then that's a beautiful answer. Start to look into that complexity. You may find that it's even more complicated than you ever thought. But when I've looked into my stuff, usually complexity and dealing with the complexity was the answer. Facing it. I can't think of any counter example because it is complicated. And it's one of the reasons why I'm personally a fan, and I have a bias here because it really helped me. But I'm a fan of psychotherapy and really almost dogmatic forms of psychotherapy that really force you into death anxiety and acknowledging and recognizing your resistance and seeing your resistance in action. And one of the things that's needed for that is complexity, because that simple picture I have now of the way things were in the past comes from going through the complexity. Now it's like, oh yeah, all that makes sense if I just look at the simple model of the explanation. But that simple model of the explanation didn't do squat for me at the time. All right, let's have a look at Lady B's question here. Lady B says, my memory is pretty terrible. I blank out when trying to remember common names, places, things. I can't conform sentences out loud. I'm not sure if I'm getting dumb or lost confidence. Any solutions? Yes, we can get some solutions for you going. Reclaiming Life recommends that you start with the link to the free memory improvement kit. Yes, that's there, magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. And so in terms of blanking out, let us know, is this now new? Are you concerned because you suddenly are blanking out more recently with common places and names and stuff, or is it an older issue that you're now just suddenly getting concerned with? Let us know a little bit more in the chat, because sometimes there are things where you might want to go to the doctor, and I'm very grateful that William is mentioning the free memory improvement kit. But if there's an issue, all the memory training in the world isn't necessarily going to help you with that. But you can click that link in the chat there, and it should open a new tab for you, depending on what device you're on. And you can register for that, and it certainly will help. But it'll help you start to memorize information in a way that you won't forget it if you don't want to, and it can sharpen you up so that you get a little bit more fluidity and flexibility. But if you have a sudden issue where you're no longer able to enunciate and it's going on for 3 to 4 hours or 3 to 4 years, I'd see a doctor for sure as a first line of attack. This is, and I don't know if you've already been to one, but yeah, definitely go to a doctor. It's not an LOL. This can be very, very serious. There's a lot of people who they go and see a doctor, and the doctor figures out what's going on, and they're like, "Why didn't you come see me 4 years ago?" And whatever that answer is deeply, problematic. You've got to go and check this out. There's a difference between everyday memory loss and serious memory loss, serious problems with being able to enunciate, to being able to recall these things, and you've got to get it checked out. I don't know what all those things could be, but they do exist. And I've had someone on the podcast who was having some serious issues like that, and it turned out just getting some fillings removed fixed the problem. So I would definitely start to explore those avenues, and that's where I would start. So yes, the memory kit will potentially help you going forward in a way that could resuscitate some of those skills, but please get that checked out. Please do immediately. Like, leave this stream and go book that appointment now, please. Very important. Like, seriously, I'm not kidding. There's no reason to be messing around on a memory training when you've got this history. And if you're speaking slower than usual, look, you can come back and watch the replay, but I've seen this happen to a family member. We went, and it was early onset dementia. Through some exploration, she was able to actually get on a program that reversed it and has just been fine. And it was even worse than not, like, she would start to call me by my brother's name, but I'm not my brother. Our names are not even remotely similar. Even if our first letters of our names are close together in the alphabet, like, it's really difficult to mix us up. And then falling down also was at play here. Anyway, it came down to early onset dementia, and because that it was caught soon enough, we were able to reverse that almost, I would say completely. So very, very important to go and get that checked out. And you say, I always thought it was the fact that I wasn't in school and an avid reader or health. Well, why are you still here? Please go and come back later. I'd really appreciate you telling us that you have booked an appointment with a doctor. That would be great. But yeah, I saw it personally, and it was very, very scary to watch that happen to my precious family member. And it was turned around. And obviously, what worked in that situation, we can't know if that will work for you or not. But it'll probably be it could likely be something similar. Hanafi is in the house. Good to see you, Hanafi. You say the average human attention span has fallen from 12 seconds in 2000 or around the time the mobile revolution began to 8 seconds. Yeah, that goldfish myth has been debunked, and it's not that you're necessarily wrong, but it is not what it seems. So we need to put some critical thinking around that. There's a history to the goldfish attention span metaphor. It emerged at a certain time and a certain place, and it just doesn't stand to reason, and it doesn't hold water. And a lot of the reason why it doesn't hold water is because we have unlimited attention span for video games, for certain movies, if we're interested in them, etc., for books that we actually want to read, and so on and so on. There's actually areas in which our attention span is profound. And this goldfish attention span myth has really violated the truth in some rather disgusting ways. So there are things in terms of digital dementia, sometimes called digital amnesia. I prefer digital amnesia because it gives us hope. And we want to really think about it, as always, in context, and not throw around meaningless statements that have limited truth value when we can avoid it, and really catch them when they come up. And in terms of the digital problem, one of the other things about the attention span myth is that it's not really about attention span. It's about consumption behavior. So they're using that term attention span incorrectly. A lot of it has to do with the impossibility of ever processing information in the behavioral ways that people are using the digital technology. And a lot of that behavior has translated to how people engage with books. They're no longer reading books as one would read books. And there's generational issues. It's very, very complex. So thank you for that contribution, but it's one that needs a lot of finesse. And Mr. Space says, can you explain, organize, and plan in more depth, please? I want to apply this to language learning. Great. So in language learning, one of the ways you organize and plan is you know the 80-20 rule, and you figure out not these word frequency lists, but you figure out what is the, say, 20 words out of 100 that you're most likely to need this week. And then you get those in your memory. You get them in sentences. You get them into use so you can use them. Then next week, you do it again. You plan and you organize those words. You figure them out. Whatever you want to do. I'm doing like a little experiment with cards right now, etc. And I'm doing a little experiment too by taking a course, an actual class, which is like it's a good thing to do. But I do it every couple of years. I go and take a language learning class just to see how they're teaching things and so forth. But yeah, basically, if you just focus on the words you actually will need to accomplish particular goals and get them down and not look at necessarily word frequency lists, although you can. But even then, you look at the word frequency lists and you call them. You call them and you organize them. And then in terms of actually organizing them into memory palaces, I have a methodology I recommend. And you can use that, which is organizing them alphabetically. You can also organize them thematically. You can organize them grammatically. You can organize them any way that you want. But the point is you're much more likely to actually get them nailed down with some form of organization rather than this, well, I'll use this software now, and then I'll use that software now, and I'll just like constantly expose myself to endless things. You're probably not going to get very far very fast that way. So hope that answers your question, Mr. Space. What language do you want to learn? That would be interesting to know. And Lady B says, I'm only 25. Wow, dementia. Early onset dementia, I don't think has a basement number, but I really don't know. Can be something else. I'm just encouraging you to go and see the doctor. Very, very important. All right. So to sum up on today's session, if you want to add any last comments or questions, maybe I'll check briefly into the mailbox here. Let's see here. Sammy asks me how to increase short-term memory and retain it with long-term memory. That's an excellent question, Sammy. Thank you for emailing that. And the answer is very, very simple. And I've covered it in detail on last week's podcast and blog post. So I'll make sure to get you that link, and perhaps I'll share it right now in the chat, because it is one of these things where people, they ask about short-term memory, and the reality is that it's not really about improving short-term memory. It's about comprehensive memory improvement. And I think you can improve short-term memory, but it's not really about short-term memory. It's about comprehensive memory improvement. And so I covered that on this new podcast and blog post and explained how that it needs to be comprehensive. So that's magneticmemorymethod.com, improve short-term memory, or just Google it if you don't have the link to click. I guess I better pop that in for the Facebook people as well. I'm not sure if that shows up properly. It never seems to, but we'll give it a try anyway. No, it's not even working for some reason. No, I can't share it on there. Something's wrong with the Facebook API at the moment. I'm actually surprised that it's showing up on Facebook at all, given the hysteria with which they recently made an announcement that we wouldn't be able to restream to Facebook, but apparently we are. But anyway, to get a little bit more into the short-term memory and the long-term memory, basically like this morning, I was on the podcast interview, just threw a bunch of numbers at me, and I used an approach to be able to manage that amount of information, which, for the podcast purposes was not that much, but it was a fair amount, and most people would forget it. What I needed to do was actually use the techniques in such a way that it makes it easy to manage while he's talking to me. So he throws some numbers at me. Then for, I don't know, it must have been 10, 15 minutes or maybe longer, maybe a bit shorter, I'm not sure. But he just starts to ask me all this stuff and carry on. And then he says, okay, you ready to tell me what those numbers are? Well, the question is, are they still in short-term memory or are they now in long-term memory? I don't know. I can tell you right now, I'm pretty sure what they were: 6700, 36, 2621 must be. And so which is short, which is long? I'm not going to remember those numbers tomorrow because I'm not going to do anything to help me remember those numbers. But which is the short-term memory? Which is the long-term memory? It's not really a useful question. The question is, can you memorize what you want to memorize? And is it there when you want it later? If you can just get to that understanding, then the terms short and long-term memory really don't matter. What matters is, are you a mnemonist? Are you able to memorize what it is you want and have it when you want it later? And there's no necessarily easy answer to you being able to say, well, how do I know what I want later? You don't. So what you do is you train your memory and you design your life in such a way that you're able to be the best possible you and have the best possible memory in that future moment where you don't know what's going to happen, whether you need something or not. There was an email that I got that just, sort of makes me laugh about how I had a guest on the podcast who couldn't remember the name of a couple of things. And they said, well, I'm not going to buy their book or whatever. Well, in this case, the person on the podcast was not promoting their memory, but rather something else. And this is just a deep understanding of the memory techniques. As far as I know, that person had never memorized using memory techniques what it was that they were talking about. And, if you think about how these techniques work and you really understand it, there's examples. For example, a memory competitor who won the World Memory Championships then goes and gets interviewed on a TV show and forgets the name of the host, right? Well, you can actually do that. You can build your memory so you can win the World Memory Championships and still be a human and forget the name of the host of the TV show that you're on. I'll be the first to admit, it doesn't speak that well to certain aspects of it, but at the same time, it speaks very well of it because that person trained to win a competition and he won it, right? And this situation, I've never seen the footage of the show or whatever and whatnot, but in that particular context, whatever happened there happened. And yes, the same person can have a lapse in attention. What really would matter there is, how is he able to then explain the situation and handle himself with comportment, which is exactly what happens when you forget things in real life. And how curious are you to self-examination to think, oh, that's a curious outcome. How can I fix that? Really what's going to matter is your ability to actually just deal with it. And the same thing in the competition. Actually, people make mistakes in the competition that causes them to lose the prize. Same thing in life. But you don't have to lose the prize if you have the right attitude and mindset, etc. Mr. Space says, my English is not good. I want to be able to write sentences correctly in English. Sound and writing is different, and it's really hard for me to write correctly. Great. Well, Mr. Space, if you want to learn how to write quote-unquote correctly, you'll need to define for me what correct is. And you say you have bad English spelling. I haven't seen any typos. I haven't really noticed if you have made any spelling mistakes. But, grammar, being able to write well, spelling mistakes, I've developed a fairly strong ability to write. I still make spelling mistakes. I don't know if my spelling is good or bad. I would suggest that you start to craft some very, very good goals. What kind of sentences do you want to write? What is the purpose of the writing that you want to do? Then you can create a program of practice to get you there. Very, very simple. And, as we talked about today, there's some accelerated learning approaches that you can use to help you learn that goal. And one of the ones that you might want to consider is finding a coach or a mentor who can help you if you need help crafting those specific goals, and then give you assignments and look over your stuff and help you figure that out. That would be one of the ways to actually get that done a lot faster. And writing, if you want to write well, there is memory involved in it, but more importantly than that, there's just a lot of writing that needs to be done. So write like crazy, and link it to an outcome. I'm confident that you can improve. Reclaiming Life says, are the flashcards that you are working with for language right now based on Gabe Weiner's Fluent Forever type of system from the book? Great question, William. No, not really. First of all, I was doing this before I ever read Fluent Forever. And they're very different because these do not have the answer on the back. If I've written anything, it is Cheech with yen on a dam with a B. I don't even really remember what I wrote there because I don't remember anymore. I just know what this word is. And I don't recall that being in Fluent Forever at all, that strategy. So this is just basically what I have in the masterclass. It's very powerful. It's much more powerful than anything that I've seen. Certainly it agrees with certain things that Gabe talks about in terms of creating your own cards, but he's kind of gone a different path with software, although his book still exists. And also there are some other principles that are at play in this that also are similar to what he's talking about, but I have added a few little twists that I think are very wise in what Buzan teaches. And I'll probably be updating the course with this strategy very, very soon, as opposed to just creating another course. I'm probably just going to update it. We'll see. I'm just running an experiment, and it's a lot of fun to do more experiments, but it's sort of like a variation experiment rather than anything radically new, just to see how that it goes. Similar to the Camp Mist formula, which is in the FAQ section of the masterclass if you're in there and haven't checked it out. It's a variation on just some common things. And incidentally, speaking of Camp Mist and that sort of variation, there's another one coming that is really amazing. Can't wait to get it out there. Rashid is in the house. Thanks for being here, Rashid. Please cover how to increase the comprehension of difficult concepts as well as how to read with faster comprehension with reading. Great question, Rashid. Please give me a difficult concept to deal with. I'm not sure what's happening with our chat here. Something has gone totally crazy. There we go. I must have clicked something strange. Apologies for that. Yeah, Rashid, please give me an example of a difficult concept. And in terms of reading faster, we have a whole live stream on reading comprehension. So I would suggest that you check that out. Very briefly, one of the things that you can do while you're reading is what we talked about today earlier, actually, being very engaged with the text, the who, what, where, when, why, doing certain comparisons and contrasts, having a mind to develop historical context so that you can mix and match things. And it really comes down to context. So if you can fill in the details, then we can proceed from a more specific standpoint. Lady B says, is it true that someone's reading comprehension is fixed by the third grade? I really don't know who is saying that. Please let me know who is saying that and what evidence that they provide to support their finding. Hanafi says, it's. Okay, I assume more is coming from you. Rashid says, quantum physics and neuroscience. Great. Specific example. What is a specific example in quantum physics and or neuroscience of something that you're talking about? That's an example of the category, But if you want to provide a specific example, that's where we can have some fun. But I don't know that there's anything difficult in either of those fields until you show me what it is. All right. And if he says, one thing that has always surprised me is that memory slow. Okay, please expand on that. That would be wonderful. And let me have another look here through mailbag, see what we got going on here. Rasil asks me about the mastermind program. And he said, do you have another mastermind program? I like the current one very much. Okay, well, it may be that we could come up with another one. I've thought a lot about a secondary mastermind to really dive deep into some more techniques with more people interested in more next level stuff, maybe reading, study groups, and so forth. Need to do some more exploration around that. There's endless kinds of little granular things that we could do, but obviously I have to have an interest in them and some proficiency in them. So critical thinking is an area that we could go into. I'll just need to ask him more about what he's thinking in terms of a secondary mastermind group. I'm very pleased to have such a wonderful question. Study groups are really great. I've found them quite useful, but they need to have a purpose and outcome, and they need to have the right members, people who are really dedicated to contributing. And so far, we're quite blessed to have that with the master class. But not entirely sure how that will go in the future, but it's been wonderful, and it's just a matter of more experiments. And I was really glad that see, one of the things is the time zone differences and people showing up, but really surprised that that he likes what's already going on already. So wonderful. Reclaiming, let's see. Rashid says, like, how to approach a certain subject to understand it well. Well, Rashid, I'm not sure if you want to focus on just general certain subjects or if you want to actually go deeper into what it is that you're actually talking about. But you can go back and watch the replay, and I think that will help you with this particular thing because we've covered that today. But if you have specific questions, by all means, come back to the replay and post them underneath the discussion. Claiming Life says, start up a book club again. All right, that's possible. Can certainly think about it. One of the interesting things about the book club, though, and there's complexities, not that this speaks against it, but are people actually going to get those books? And are they going to read them in such a way that we'll have a meaningful discussion about them? And we'll have to see. And then, should it be a memory book club or should it be something else? That would be interesting. Speaking of books, Sean asks, is your book still for sale online? I guess the question there would be, Sean, which one? If it's the memory connection that you're referring to, no, that is now gone, and those books are off and away. And thanks, everyone, for being so enthusiastic about that. That was a lot of fun. And the new book, I'm still going through the edit that I received back. There's still a lot more improvement to come. There's one of the cool things about having it edited by somebody else is you then see, oh, this has got to be in there and that's got to be in there. You see it from a different perspective. So I'm really going to put in the time. And I know some people have been emailing me. They're like, I can't wait for this new book. Maybe I started to talk about it a little bit too soon because I'm going to put the elbow grease into it to do more, get some help to make photographs of memory palaces, how exactly, as best as I can, represent something purely in the mind on the page, and specifically with a mnemonic example of the Ribhu Gita, which is going to be great. And And that's actually thanks to Maricella for that suggestion, because she's like, yeah, put that in there, which is obviously what the book is about. But yeah, sorry if you missed that, Sean. But those are gone. And what a great thing that sold out. I'll if I ever write a book about being a publisher of your own books, I will put a picture in there of what our house looks like with all those books around. Amazing. All right, Sean is in on the book club. All right, I will put some thought into that and see what I can come up with. Let's see. Lady B asks, why do you think memory is becoming such a big issue that you could create a channel around it? Well, memory is not becoming such a big issue. Memory has always been the central issue of all humanity. The great philosophers knew this. They talked a lot about memory in the Western tradition, in the traditions of Buddhism and so forth. Memory is a huge part of this. In ancient survival traditions of, figuring out where plants were and not poisoning yourself, memory was a big deal. You needed to remember that. It feels like it's becoming more and more of a big deal because in one sense it really is, now that we have the assault of digital information eroding our abilities in some sense while enhancing it in others. And there's a lot of problems, as I sort of pushed back on Hanafi there. There's a lot of problems of actually figuring out what the problem is, and we need to bring some finesse to thinking about that problem. And one of the things that we can do is not just assume that it is a new thing, that we could create a huge channel around it. It's not so big that we could create a channel. It's always been there. Memory is what we are. Memory is actually what's making it possible for us to talk now. Everything we're doing is being recorded into memory in the machines, and everything that one would take away from this will be taken from memory. We're information storage and retrieval devices. That's what humans have evolved to be, and it's one of the things that makes humans unique. Not to say that other animals don't remember things, but we remember things in a particularly strange way. We remember things that help us organize in very sophisticated ways, that help us create pleasure in very sophisticated ways, that help us in many ways actually shift and shape our environments that is just unparalleled in the animal kingdom. And we are doing it because of the brain's capacity to not just remember things, but organize what has been memorized and then make images of a potential future, remember what that potential future might be like, and then have external ways of recording what it is that we thought, and offloading some of that memory to plans and blueprints and charts and flows and all kinds of wonderful things. And we assemble with technology. We've assembled with technology for thousands of years to help us manage massive amounts of mental content in order to make things and change things and have all kinds of things that other animals just don't seem to have. Who knows? Maybe they do in their own way, but it seems pretty obvious they don't. But I think it's not really more or less of an issue than it ever was. It appears to be more of an issue because of the technological onslaught, but it's actually not that clear just how much of an issue it is. Although I will contradict myself and say it's obviously a huge one. And one of the reasons why is not so much the technology, but the use of the technology in a lot of, let's say, commercial political ways, that we are getting ground up in the battle for control over the means of the production through which the technology allows and enables information to flow. And there, our best tool is not just memory, but the critical thinking and the discernment of what we're going to participate and what we're going to allow to essentially conduct how we behave, conduct how we think, influence how we think, or conduct how we think by influencing us to think that we've landed at our own conclusion when actually we were led there. So that's very important. All right, let's catch up with a couple last chats here. Physico is in the house. Good to see you, Physico. You say, I do know something. Nothing is difficult. Only things take time. Nothing except one thing, to know what is really important to us and to our own people and equilibrate. Is that a word? Equilibrate those with the things that we like. Great. Well, Physico, I'm just going to have to push back on that because there are some things that are difficult. There's no point in dancing around that. So, but great contribution. Thanks as always for being here. And it is important to know what is important to us. That's for sure. Hanafi says, I remember seeing memory courses in comics as a kid. I actually ordered one, learned stuff like the PEG major system, so memory skills was a thing. Yeah, well, they certainly were sold in comic books, that's for sure. Very interesting advertisements for them too. I like to look at them. Arguably, one of the earliest examples of memory being advertised is with Bruno, but I don't entirely know enough about that to say, but it certainly smacks of early advertising, and I'll be looking more into that to see if that actually deserves that word. Sean says, we know that information is accessible, so we don't remember it. We remember how to navigate to find the answers, not the actual answer. There's nothing to fear. There are only things to understand. Yeah, well, I mean, you could say that that's always been true. That's not new with the internet. And there are some things where not only do we offload onto the technology, whether it's a book or a hard drive, but we must in order to accomplish certain goals. So again, everything has to do with context, and that's very important. All right. That was a great chat today. Thanks everyone for being here. Really appreciated it, and look forward to seeing you on the next chat. I will put some thought into a book club. If you have thoughts about what would make an amazing book club, please be in touch. Let me know what they might be. And one of the things to consider as well is what you want to see on the next live stream. I've got oodles and endless ideas, but would love to hear yours. On the recent survey where most people wanted to see more memory science, I've been thinking a lot about that. We have to see where things are going to go with the internet, because to protect the channel, I probably have to maybe not just put up scientific studies as I've done a few times, and it might be prudent to actually take those down just in case as a safety measure. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to think it through, look into it, but there's so much push now for more and more sophistication in checking out that this and that is the way that it should be on the internet. And I'm actually generally in favor of that because it creates more original research, more original content. And so I'll have to think about how to do more memory science. I would rather actually just read through studies, but I'm not sure that that's going to be a great strategy. But we'll see. All right. Physical says some ideas just need to be incubated. After they are incubated correctly, they become easy. The problem arises when people want to learn faster without giving ideas the proper time to incubate. Yeah, well, look, it's a nice thought, but one of the things that we always want to try to do is limit the generalization, because I don't think going to the moon ever gets easier. I don't think that lots of things ever get easier. I don't think that there's even a use in generalizing things to the idea that they could be incubated correctly. This is against actually what happens. The thing is, and there's just many simple examples that show just how not true that is. That there is no correctly. There's no way to be correct. Look, even if I would love to read some of my stories that I wrote when I was in elementary school, even if I could find the floppy disks that they were on, I wouldn't find a computer to put them into, right? And so, yeah, things became easy with computers, but it'd be very, very difficult to find a way to get my stories off those things. So I appreciate the sentiment, Physical, but I hope that if we ever learn one thing about this medium of being able to chat, is that the contributions that we put in there, we need to have more finesse around them and try to avoid making generalizations and statements that sound good, that are just so totalizing across the board, when the reality is that it's not that some ideas just need to be incubated, and after they get incubated, they become easy. That's pie in the sky fantasy, and it's not even useful. There's going to be, like, for example, procedures that work very well in cancer treatment, and they're going to have all this great stuff, and then some corporation is going to say, well, we got it better, and this is easier, and all that sort of stuff, and then they're going to come in and they're going to change everything, and the rate of acceleration is going to proceed in such a way that they won't even be able to get back to the old technique the way that it was supposed to work, because they got rid of all the old stuff. And like, this happens all the time. So it's a nice thought, but I think with some more consideration, you'll see that that it needs some finesse, and we would do well to think of our contributions to the discussion and try to avoid these kinds of generalizations, because they're not, when we look at that survey that I put out, the next thing after memory science was critical thinking. So if we're going to practice critical thinking, then let's do it all the time, rather than just 21% of the time, or whatever that survey result was. All right, I will do, William. Good. And Physical says, would like to see some new system ideas for memory. Some inspiration is always good. I know the memory principles, but I find them hard to apply them raw with no system. So new system, there may be new systems coming for memory. But wouldn't you be well served to actually figure out how to use the actual ones that have lasted for so long better? If you're finding them hard to apply raw, whatever that means, I'm not sure what you mean by applying them raw, then maybe you want to figure out how to work with them better so that they actually succeed, and that you improve on a proper basis. This is what I would suggest. Rather than looking for new, try to figure out the new way to you that makes more sense about how to use what actually works. Because I'm not sure that any new system is coming. There are new things in memory all the time, new approaches and so forth, but they build upon the existing structures, and your ability to actually use them and to innovate and to raise the level of challenge or whatever it might be is going to come from your competence with the basics. So if your basics aren't covered and inspiration isn't working for you, isn't helping you get there, then you need to look at a different strategy for getting into the basics. Because if you're finding it hard to apply, you're doing it wrong, because these things are not really hard. They're not necessarily easy, but they're not hard either. So how does that work? Well, we talked about that a lot today. So if you need to go watch the replay again, that would be fantastic. And but there's certainly a way for you to actually get more out of the existing memory techniques if you wanted. Hanifi says, Harry Kunzru's book Memory Palace, set in a future apocalyptic London where the art of memory is an elite cult holding destroyed books. Yeah, I haven't read that, but there's a few things that connect there. Brad Zupp and I on the podcast, the first time he was on the podcast, we talked about a theme related to this, and that's very important to go and listen to that and hear what we're saying there, bring up the Republic of Plato and different things. I myself wrote a novel called Electville that I haven't released yet, which is all about people who hold books in their minds. And I won't spoil what happens, but let's just say there's some technology involved. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for today's session. Again, I always appreciate it, and I always appreciate your feedback and your activity on the community tab for filling out those surveys and whatnot, and also, crafting ideas for the future. I'll quickly catch up here with Physico's comment. Incubation is not just about thinking about it. It's about being a critic, searching for people that know the subject better. Ask for conceptual. Ask for conceptual and material help. I do not know how to send something to the moon, but asking NASA people would probably do it. Indeed. All right. Technics working good for me. My problem is to organize my properties, plan how to repeat. Great. Well, if you keep at it, you'll get there. And obviously, Physico, there are some companies who gave up asking for NASA and are doing it a different way. So I wouldn't limit it to NASA, and I wouldn't necessarily expect that they're capable of the best possible way of getting there. I think that my rebuttal to you was on the ideas more than the example. All right. Thank you, everybody. Till we have a chance to speak again, come visit me at magneticmemorymethod.com and keep yourself magnetic. Bye-bye.